Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to this event. So the event is in 3 parts. I'm going to give a brief introduction, about 15 minutes, to the phenomenon that we're talking about. Then we have a film which was made by Asten Holmes-Elliott, whom we're lucky enough to have here as well. And then there will be plenty of time for audience questions at the end of the film. So the film is one of the outcomes of a project that was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. The main investigator on this project was Professor Laura Dominguez from the University of Southampton, and then there were Dr. Glyn Hicks, myself, I'm Monika Schmid, and Dr. E. Jamieson, who's here today as well. And we were looking in this project, the project was called Vulnerable Native Grammars, and in it we were looking at a phenomenon that is known by the name of language attrition. So language attrition is a concept that not everybody is familiar with. I've been personally working on it for about 30 years now, and I've been trying to sort of find a good definition, and then I found one in a novel. It's a novel by the Scottish author Alexander McCall Smith, who wrote this. He's written a number of series of books of mainly murder mysteries, and one of these series is set in Botswana. It's called The Number One Ladies Detective Agency. If you don't know it, stop whatever you're doing, go to the nearest bookshop and buy it. It's absolutely fabulous. And volume 4 of this series is called The Full Cupboard of Life. The main character, the lady detective, is called Mara Motsue, and she, throughout the novel, she sits and reflects and philosophizes, and this is one of those instances. And she's thinking, Mara Motsue had once come across somebody who had forgotten his Setswana. Setswana is the main language spoken in Botswana. And she had been astonished and shocked. This person had gone to live in Mozambique as a young man. When he came back to Botswana 30 years later, it seemed as though he were a foreigner. To lose your own language was like forgetting your mother, and as sad in a way. We mustn't lose Setswana, she thought, even if we speak a great deal of English these days, because that would be like losing part of one's soul. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with, when we're talking about language attrition, when we're looking at language attrition, we're looking at the phenomenon that a native language, a language that you spoke as your dominant language for a large part of your life, falls into disuse because you move somewhere else. It has happened to me. My native language is German, and I've not lived in Germany for a very long time. And all of a sudden you begin to experience strange things in this language. Linked to this experience, very, very closely, is the fact that other people tend to have very strong responses to this. I've got a little collections of quotes like this one, and another one of these quotes is about that. It comes from Hilary Mantel's novel Wolf Hall, and she talks about the poor ill-fated Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn, and this is sort of historically real. Anne Boleyn was born to an aristocratic family in England, but was sent to France when she was a small child, and she was raised in the court of the French king. She was raised French-speaking. Letters that she wrote to her parents as a child survive, and she wrote to them in French. Under these kinds of circumstances, it is almost inevitable that you will lose your first, particularly for small children. Small children can forget their native up until about the age of 12. If you stop using one language and start using another, the language that you were born to is gone. But Hilary Mantel, who is in general not very complimentary about Anne Boleyn, I love this little, and she's very much a poser in the novel, and very much sort of, everything she does it for effect, like the way that she uses language. So she's recently returned to England. Now she speaks her native tongue with a slight unplaceable accent, strewing her sentences with French words when she pretends she can't think of the English. So Mantel is being sort of deliberately nasty here, of course, but this is what happens. When you find yourself in this situation that your native language words elude you, you do weird things in your grammar and whatever, the reactions you come up against are very often exactly like that. They're saying, you're saying, right, you've been abroad for 2 months, and now you're like, I'm this metropolitan person, I'm so multilingual that I've forgotten my native language, And when I try to speak German and words are missing and I make grammatical mistakes, the last thing in the world that I feel is cool and metropolitan. And, I feel like an absolute idiot. So what happens when you leave the country where your native language is spoken, when you learn, particularly in this first intensive years when you become more fluent in your other language, there is a need for your brain to push away your first language, to say, the first language is so strong and so established, and every time you want to say something, the first language is sort of shouting in the back of your head, and you have to tell it, no, go away, I don't want you now, I want to speak Dutch or French or Spanish or whatever, I don't want to speak German, I don't want to speak English. And then the language basically crawls off into a corner of your brain and sulks and is like, okay, so now you want me again, right? Well, you can just sort of come and whistle for me. I'm not coming back. I'm not just giving you the words that you want. And you find odd and unexpected things beginning to happen in your first language, and collectively these things are what we call language attrition. So what do they look like? Well, very often you find yourself halfway through a sentence and you realize, oh my God, I've built this sentence on the grammatical template of my second language. There's absolutely no way that I'm ever going to come out of this sentence alive and that I'm ever going to turn this into a good German sentence, it just isn't going to work. You can become very, very disfluent. You find yourself going, pausing, backtracking, changing your words halfway through all the time. You do this thing, you strew your sentences with French words when you pretend that you can't think of the English. No, the French words just sort of creep in, or you say, well, what's the word? In English, this is what it's called. People develop a foreign accent. This is the thing, I think, that feels most odd and is most estranging also to other people. It happens to me a lot when I'm in Germany and I go into a shop or whatever and people say to me, oh, your German is very good. Like, well, yeah. And you can make very weird expressions. I've just got a few examples here that I really, really love. So English, of course, has the word to run in English can be used in contexts that don't literally mean running. So you can run for office or you can run short of something. And there are attested examples of people in Spanish, for example, saying correr para gobernador, which just really literally means to run for the governor. It doesn't mean to can't mean to run for office. In German, this is one of my absolute favorites. Ich renne kurz an Briefpapier. I'm running short of letter paper. Literally translated, it cannot mean that in German. It sounds really, really cute and lovely, but it just doesn't make sense. This does not only happen when it's two languages fighting it out in your brain, it can also be two dialects. So there are English actors like Gary Oldman who go and live in Hollywood, and also, of course, actors from other languages. I would really love, for example, to talk to people like Penelope Cruz and see what does she actually do to maintain her Spanish. So Gary Oldman has been living in Hollywood, has been living in the US for a very long time, and most of his professional career he has worked in the US. His family speaks American English, his children speak American English, and he employed a voice coach just to make sure that when he is called on to play the English baddie in Hollywood films and things like that, that his native Englishness is actually remains authentic. Similarly, this is there are several studies. Laura Dominguez, who was the main investigator on this project, has also worked on this. When in the US, of course, very many different varieties of Spanish come together. People move to the US from Spain, they move from Venezuela, they move from Cuba, they move from all over Latin America. And what we find is that in that kind of situation, a sort of mixed variety appears that has characteristics of all these different dialects that are just kind of thrown into this big melting pot. Very slowly, language attrition has come to be sort of picked up in the public mind a little bit. It was really funny. About 10 years ago, there was a big article in one of Germany's largest news magazines, Der Spiegel, which was 4 pages, basically about, mainly based on my work, and it was about what happens with the first language. And of course, I was chuffed. I was really happy about this. And when I looked at the table of contents of the magazine, they always have the title of the article, and then you have a very short description of what the article is all about. And what it said in that description is how the second language is influenced by the native language when you learn a foreign language. So how the native language interferes with learning a foreign language. And I thought, no, this is not what it's about. So clearly, somebody in the editorial team had seen the draft of the table of contents, had thought, what do you mean, first language influenced by the second language? Obviously, that's nonsense. Hadn't even bothered to go and check the article, but had just corrected it. That's how clear it is that this is something that can never happen. So just a few weeks ago, there was a big story in the New York Times magazine about this. There was a podcast. Then some years ago, there was an article in The Guardian about it. There was something that I wrote about Hilaria Baldwin, poor woman who got lots of flack for being a, quotes, fake Spaniard and pretending that her English had suffered. And the BBC had, about 10 years ago, had a big story where they went out and talked to people. And people reported this kind of thing. They reported feeling a kind of loss, and how that affects their sense of self. You know, how does one language allow you to feel yourself, and what happens when the other one slips away? What does that mean for your identity? And how people don't believe it. People look at me skeptically when I say that I have lost my Dutch language. When I speak to my mother, I have to look up the words in the dictionary because I don't understand what she's saying anymore. I moved to Denmark 25 years ago, and my English is a disaster. My sentences are all wrong. My grammar is back to front. I find it hard to express myself when I try to speak Portuguese, and so on and so forth. So as part of this project that we did at the University of Southampton, we thought it would be really nice to try and capture in a little bit more detail the experiences that people have when they are losing their native language. And so this is what Asten did in this film that you're about to see.
I remember when I came to England the first time, I take the plane to here, and I can see the plane going through like levels and levels of clouds and levels, and I'm like, and when does this end?
Never.
Honestly, because when you fly and you go to Tunisia, you can see Tunisia like 2 hours away.
to Northern English.
But we used to say, do you say grass and dancing and lager?
And lager.
and we say, no, we say grass and dancing and lager.
Oh, Sean, what's he having? He's having an apple, isn't he? Hello, Sean.
Hey, Sean.
I'm Pat.
And I'm Aileen, Pat's friend.
So you came to live here in 83 and I was here in 1980. I think you just had your birthday,
I think I was
31.
maybe 31.
Because I was just coming 31 before I had Sophie, and I said to Pete I had to have a baby by the time I was 30, and he just made it.
Yeah, well, that was good.
It was only when we both qualified and we were both teaching in Edinburgh that we started sharing flats together and became really good friends.
Yeah, that was the thing.
I mean, I could hear myself speaking like Aileen the more I was with her.
So
I think it's so natural to do that.
exactly, without even meaning to, but
Yeah.
just because.
But I mean, things like when I was a little girl, my mum and dad would say, you know, Saturday night's your bath night. It's bath night. It's not, but I wouldn't say that now. But that's not because I've chosen to change. It's just I've been exposed to it for so long here. When I go home, well, I mean, my parents are not here anymore, but when I used to go back to Carlisle, I would say I was really English.
Yeah, but
You know, Southern English, which is so funny, I think, because, you know, I don't think I am.
My mother laughs because very often, if I forget a word in Polish and I will ask her, she will forget that word. She always says that, like, you know, I cannot speak in English, but my Polish is gone. So, my name is Martin Rolek, and I live in Southampton. Although that's not my first name is Sławomir, but it's difficult for many people to pronounce, especially for my students. So I just went for my middle name, and that's how most people know me. Most people don't even know my first name. And when, like, my family addresses me in that way, sometimes I just need a minute for it to click. It's like, oh yeah, that's me. Yeah, yes. What do we want? My mother tongue is Polish, because my first language would be English at this point. The problem with my Polish now is that I actually don't have much exposure to Polish beyond some of my friends. It's sort of similar with my mother. She is conflicted. She's been conflicted for a long time because she misses Poland, and then like, she gets annoyed that sometimes she wants to do things and she doesn't have the language capacity to do those things. But then when she goes to Poland and she sort of feels the reality of living there, and sort of realizing that I've been gone for nearly a quarter of a century now, I do not feel like this is my home anymore.
There, it's everywhere, it's in the air. I'm breathing Arabic, what are you talking about? Of course it's there. It's there. But I told you, my mistake that I started thinking in English, I shouldn't. Although people think I'm French, because of my accent, they say I have a French accent, but in reality, I lost my French, so I'm a bit lost in the middle. Now it's a little bit back, but I find the English is the most dominant than anything. Yeah. Well, I hope we fix that. I'm not complaining about the English, but it is real. As long as I'm living here, it will be that way. Yeah. It's Rauda. That's my real name. People call me Rose because it's easier. I live in Hastings. I used to live in London, and it's been now almost 6 years in the UK. 6, yeah. So the Arabic language, I'm Tunisian, so the Arabic language is so rich. Like, there's so many words to say that I can't literally find in English, and I try so hard to find. But the other thing that started happening to me when I moved here, even thinking, I started thinking in English, and I'm talking to myself in English. I'm like, no, just speak in Arabic because you need to, the authenticity of any person comes from their language. So when I start thinking and talking to myself in Arabic, it's completely different. I can tell you that the outcome of my thoughts are not the same way as I speak to myself in English. I find that interesting.
My name is Atsuko Chandra. I live in England, in Southampton. I was born in Tokyo 1945. My native language and native culture is come back very quickly when I'm there, but suddenly change is quite difficult. Lots of friends, very close friends, say, your Japanese accent is a bit funny. You speak like a foreigner speak Japanese. I didn't recognize that maybe accent was slightly different, but maybe other countries people doesn't catch. But Japanese, my friends, they know me from the little age, so they think my language is a bit funny.
Very often is like we all form our own identities. And sometimes we might prefer one identity over other, or one identity might work, depending on a situation. If I switch to Polish, being in Poland, things will sort of click much faster, like what people want me to do, or I will recognize things. But at the same time, I am extremely polite for a Polish person. If I'm in Poland, the please and thank yous that we use in Britain as a standard language is not something that you would use in Poland. Slavic languages are very direct, and everybody's like, such a nice, polite person. It's like, it does work to my advantage, but that's my British side, I would say.
So thirsty in the desert and finding water. That's how I am. If I go back home speaking Arabic, I crave to talk and express myself in Arabic way. It's something I really miss. But the culture is the problem for me more than the language. There's a lot of passive aggressive in the English language, and I'm not that way. Yes, I don't find the words, but even if when I find them, I find it hard to use some words. I would rather be honest and not rude, because rudeness in my country is another thing. It's another level. I'm Tunisian in the end of the day. So it's the language and the culture side by side.
Yes, both.
Yeah, we both had our children down here.
You'd never know we were
Related.
Not so much you and yours, but
Well,
no.
I mean,
yeah.
It's funny that the funniest thing that I've found since I've been home, since Stephanie's been living with me for the last 6 months, is there's a couple of words that she started to say, like for. No, she wouldn't say for. She'd say for. And just one or two other little things. Mm-hmm. White. She'll pronounce the H in white, which she wouldn't have done, and she remarks on it and she thinks it's funny.
Yeah.
But it's just because she's picked it up being back at home for 6 months. So it's quite interesting. Soon to be going.
After I had the girls, I used to find myself saying to them exactly the same phrases that my mum used to say to me.
I think we
growing
probably
up
do.
and
We probably do it with the babies.
babes
We
as
probably
well.
do it with
yeah,
Morris and
just
Shawnee. When I've got Shawnee, I find myself saying things that my mum used to say. If it's something's dirty, I say, "Aki-poo, aki-poo." That's what she used to say. "Aki-poo, aki-poo, don't touch." Of course, it doesn't mean a thing to her.
no quite, but it will.
It will.
And even with
Or
Morris,
maybe it does. Who knows?
I sort of when he's just started to say Todd for the dog, and I hear him when he says it. It sounds a wee bit
says it
funny
like
to me, but he
you.
obviously says it like me.
Like
but-
he hears it.
Like he
Of
hears
course
it,
he
but
does.
I-
Yes.
I sent my daughter to the English school. She was supposed to be born in Kenya, but I went to Japan and I had her. Then I went back to Africa, and she was educated in a few different countries, and she forget all Japanese. Funny, it's maybe my fault, but it is like that. It doesn't. If it doesn't speak language, few months with the children, they can't catch up. Then she married to the American, then went to San Francisco. I have only one daughter, but she's got 4 children, so I have 4 grandchildren. I have American English, they speak. Born in San Francisco. When they speak faster, very difficult to understand, but it's American children. They are typical American children. My son-in-law said, please teach Japanese, but so far it's a bit difficult to teach. When living together, it's much more easier.
I want to catch the rules and hold on them and keep them in the ground, because everything is fading, everything has no identity, has no meaning, everything is judged. Oh, you can't be this, you can't be that, but I am that. I can change to improve, but if something identifies me, why do you want me to give it up?
Have you noticed any difference in individuals who have family members speaking their native language with them? So, for example, an Italian person who comes here and with Italian relatives and speaks Italian at home, is the language attrition less than if they come here on their own and really have to speak English all the time?
That's a good question. Sorry, do you want me to repeat the questions? Can you hear them? I think you were very good and you were projecting towards the back as well. It's a good question. I mean, if I were to go out on the street and I were to show you speech samples from 2 people, one of whom had strong attrition and the other hadn't, and I said, what do you think the difference is between those people? Why has one? 99 out of 100 people would say it's because the person who's still better speaks it more. Yeah? That is, interestingly, something we have never been able to find any evidence for whatsoever. And the person who speaks Italian with people back at home is likely, if anything, to have more attrition than the person who only ever speaks English, partly because you sort of bounce these things off each other. Yeah? So one person starts using a word or using a grammatical construction that comes from English, and you hear it and it becomes natural and you start using it as well. So in this kind of thing, you get like accelerated language change. But it seems to me that the underlyingly, the language in the brain by the time you are an adolescent has been so established that you don't really need to rehearse it very much anymore to maintain it. So frequent use does not prevent language attrition is something that I found time and time again in lots of different studies. We always sort of thought, this must be wrong. We must have done something wrong, this can't be right. But it's been replicated so often that I'm pretty convinced now that that's the case.
My question may be a bit off-piece, but I'm wondering if you've looked at how the language one's speaking affects one's way of being. So I spent a year as an undergraduate in Spain, and I'm naturally a very reserved sort of English person, but when I'm in Spain and speaking Spanish, I become quite different. How
Very different.
how common is that? And have you done any work on that?
Well, yeah, the people you interviewed said things about that, didn't they?
Yeah, totally. Because we were talking earlier about the fact that, like, I guess it's so language is your entire kind of communication, which can be kind of like, yeah, kind of like echo chamber and loop back to your identity. And a lot of my work is based on kind of like ideas of kind of like identity in general. And actually, it's quite an ethereal thing, really, isn't it, in terms of like what it's linked to and how you can kind of like solidify that. And how you can have different identities within different spaces. Martin, the Polish guy, was talking about the fact that like he really feels like he kind of like embodies different ways of being with the different languages that he's speaking. He was actually a really interesting guy in terms of like the fact that he was talking about his Polishness, but he also can speak loads of languages and uses them in a way for his identity. So he's really into these particular Spanish novels. I didn't really understand what he's talking about, and he's got a WhatsApp group about them, and he only talks about them in Spanish to English people who also speak Spanish. They only talk about it in Spanish because he said, I can't talk about it properly, I can't embody it properly unless, because the stories are very Spanish kind of thing, unless I talk about it in Spanish. So when he was talking about that, it did seem like there was kind of a link with that kind of thing. So
it's very interesting.
Yeah, no, totally. Like, I feel like with those kind of languages as well, like this is probably maybe not true, but I feel like in languages like some people do express themselves more. Maybe like in British, you are more reserved and stuff, and so yeah, in certain languages I feel like you do, because my mum's Italian, and it's very different in terms of how she is here and she is there. So. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it okay to say something rather than ask something? Of course. Is that okay? So yes, my husband and I are English. I did an English language and linguistics degree here some time ago.
Good choice.
And our old son is a brilliant linguist, so he was very keen on German at school. And by the time he was probably about 15, he was like writing lists in German, dreaming in German, speaking German, much to our annoyance, most of the time. And said he could only dream in German, and then he went to live in Germany when he was 18, so just when he left school, and quickly became fluent. Then there came a point where the languages were kind of, he was equally fluent, and then he started to like lose the English a bit in the sense of doing the German word order and just like losing words, although he's never sort of expressed it to us as a kind of, as a loss. Well, occasionally he'll say to me like, what's that word in English? And he'll come up with some really long German, I don't have a clue what it is in English, but now he's got he's married a German woman and they've got 2 daughters. So now it's kind of like seeing the fruit of the fact that he lives so far away. He's got these bilingual grandchildren, it's just fascinating. The language development.
His English has become
fluent
again because he's speaking it every day. It'd be really interesting to see how the children change.
German's winning by a long way. but they do self-correct, and it's very interesting, isn't it? For like speak to one parent in one language and to the other. But I mean, he's just brilliant. I mean, he did a Catholic theology degree in Germany, in which he had to learn Latin, Hebrew, and Greek all through German. But that was probably just as easy for him as it would have been in English, I think, by then. So yeah, it's just
How old are
interesting.
your grandchildren?
3.5 and nearly 2.
Please make very sure when they because it'll become, the children will at that age be joyfully bilingual and love it, and then they're going to go to school. It's probably less difficult with English than it would be if it was Turkish or Polish or something, but there will be pushback, and at that age, I mean, of course, I fully understand as parents you have to pick your battles. And if the bilingualism isn't the particular hill that you choose to die on, I can understand it. But you do have to be very aware that at that age the language can be completely erased. So all of the work that you're putting in now can be gone. And so good contact with grandchildren, taking the children on holidays in that country every year. You have to maintain it until they're 13 or 14. Then the language is safe. Before then, it can be gone.
Yeah, I mean, our son only speaks to his daughters in German, but
Don't.
obviously being
Don't.
brought up in Germany. But
Don't.
the parents talk to each other in German. So.
I would advise very strongly, because then there is that thing. If the children are convinced that you don't understand any German, in order to communicate with you, they have to use English.
Yes,
That is a good thing at that stage.
Yes, yeah.
There was one of those Christmas adverts where that people that are made so that people will cry and whatever. It was a Polish grandfather at home, and he orders an English course CD for his computer, and he starts learning it, and he puts little post-its everywhere, cup and dog and whatever. And then the postman comes back and brings the next course and the next course, and he sort of keeps on saying with his headphones on the bus, "I am Robert," and "I love you," and whatever, and people look at him. And then eventually he gets on a plane, and he travels, and you can see he's in London, and he goes to a house, and it's clearly his son, and then a little girl comes out, and he sort of kneels down and says, "Hi, I am your grandfather," and not a dry eye in the house.
No, yeah.
And I'm thinking, you should have spoken Polish with her. If you had Skype with her every week, she would be fluent by now.
It's interesting that you talk about the backlash as well, though, once they get into teenagers, because you're also kind of fighting with that kind of identity that they're trying to forge for themselves. Because Laura Dominguez, who is the researcher on the project, her oldest boy, she's Spanish, and then her oldest boy brought up in England the whole time. Yeah.
I think they were in the States for a while, yeah.
Yeah, but not Spain, right?
Yeah, no.
And he can speak Spanish. She's made sure, she obviously knows, and she's made sure that she spoke with him. But when he was getting a little bit older, obviously there was the backlash, and he saw it as not cool at all, because it was part of what his mom and his grandparents and stuff like that. And she really kept her cool, I felt, as far as Laura can. And she said about the fact that last time I spoke to her at the beginning of the project and stuff, she was saying like, "Oh, Blake has just lost all his Spanish. He's just not talking it anymore. He's done with it." And she said, "I'm just going to really carefully try and introduce different parts of the culture that I think he might like." And then suddenly, when they went over for a holiday at one point, when he was 14, I think he discovered the art scene over there, and he realised that. And he was just expecting to be able to communicate with the artists, and realised he'd lost his Spanish, and was really frustrated. And then when they got back, he was like, "Mum, we need to learn my Spanish again," and really wanted to get back into it. So obviously he's really great at art, and it kind of like it linked with his identity again.
Yes.
So again, it kind of like links in that.
If you talk to scientists, if you put 10 scientists in a room and give them any question, there will be 20 different opinions and blood on the floor at the end. But I don't think you would not be able to find a single linguist who would disagree with the premise that it is good for children to be raised with more than one language. But when you go out in the real world, teachers and doctors, random strangers on the street and other language experts will tell you to stop using your language with your children because you will prevent them from learning good English. That is as wrong as it can be, and one of the reasons why it's wrong is because if your native language is not English and you live here, chances are that you will sometimes use ungrammatical constructions, and you will use things in the way that native speakers don't. So what the child gets, children learn language from input, and if the input is well structured, and if the input is consistent, the child can build a grammar. If the child gets good English, sorry about that, from their teachers, and bad English from you, you will come out with a grammar that is inconsistent. We found this in young Dutch adults of Turkish heritage. We gave them sentences, we made them listen to sentences that had grammatical errors. Now, Dutch adults whose parents were Dutch, you hear the sentence, we monitored their brain activity, you hear the error and the brain goes, "Eh!" So you can see a real spike on the EEG because the brain just doesn't like it. But for these Dutch-Turkish young adults, there was no such spike. This was a perfectly fine sentence for them. They didn't use it, but they also didn't think it was wrong, presumably because it's the kind of error that their parents made all the time. So not only does it not help to learn the language better, it is much better to get well-structured Turkish input and well-structured Dutch input than well-structured Dutch input and bad Dutch input. And how good the child is in the home language at the moment that they enter school is the best predict, not the language of the environment, but the home language is the best predictor of academic success. Sorry about that. That was my little. In healthy aging, there is a myth that you will lose the language that you spoke. There was a lovely anecdote by an Australian scientist, Michael Klein, who was looking at Dutch speakers in Australia, where this myth is particularly strong. And they all think, okay, when I stop working, when I retire, I'm going to forget my English, and I won't be able to talk to my children anymore. And he spoke to one woman who said, oh yeah, we all know that this is going to happen, and it'll happen to me when I get old. And she was 87 at the time that she said that. So in healthy aging, I don't think this is true. In dementia, it is very true. In dementia can affect anything, and it very often happens that older people who develop dementia will lose one of their languages faster than the other. It can be the second. I think it's more likely to be the second language, but it can also be that actually, a woman wrote to me once and said her husband had been completely non-verbal for a long time, and then one day she came to visit him in the home, and the nurses said, oh, we've had this lovely conversation with him, we were speaking French. And she was like, what do you mean? So she went and asked him in French, how are you? And he said, je suis très bien, merci. And she said it was the first time she had heard him speak in years. Which is another reason why it is so important that you teach your children your own language, because you may not be able to communicate in English until the end of your life.
Yes, I think you have touched. Oh, pardon me. I think you have touched on this question in some of your remarks, but I don't think you actually answered it directly. Can linguistic attrition happen in the case of people who are 100% bilingual? Meaning two languages from earliest childhood neither being dominant.
Didn't hear the question.
If you are simultaneous bilinguals with both languages from birth, can you be affected by language attrition?
So yeah, the question was if you're completely balanced, 100% balanced, both of your languages are equally strong. I don't think that exists.
Okay.
It tends to be that languages have different domains in which they are dominant, but yes, it can, of course. So I mean, if you are, those languages will always be interfering with each other. If you add another language to the mix, if your circumstances change and you speak one language less or whatever, you will find the same things.
The person, one of the people in the film, the person on the screen actually, talked about thinking in English and saw this as something which, as a negative thing. Whereas when we're learning a language, we see it as if we start thinking in the language, there's a sense of achievement. So is it some thinking in another language something to celebrate or something to regret, or is it a point at which it changes from one to the other?
I think in the case of Rose, when she was talking about that, she was lamenting losing her Arabic, and I can't remember if she actually said this context, but I think the reason she was talking about that was because she's an artist, and when she was saying the fact that she's like, there's so many more words in Arabic, she said that, and she just can't find the words in English because they don't exist. And she said that and when I was talking to her after, she was talking about how her artwork is completely different because she started thinking in English, and so she doesn't have the same amount of thoughts, she was saying. She was saying that she doesn't think about her art in the same way anymore. So that was the context in terms of her saying that she didn't want to think in English, I think because it was affecting her work at that point. But yeah, I know what you mean in terms of, like, I ask lots of people in terms of, like, I said, do you dream in English? And Mose actually said, who dreams with words? And I was like, oh, okay. Okay, that's just a completely different conversation kind of thing. But yeah, when my friends could speak French and none of us could, the idea that she was thinking in French and stuff is their sense of achievement. So yeah, I think it was because it was affecting other areas of her identity than that, in that particular context. But yeah, I'm not sure about other people.
I think it's probably unhelpful to be judgmental about the things that either you do or that other people do, or say, because I did X, Y happened. Because this causal link, I think, is just not at all established. And I think when we learn language and when we talk, we communicate, we do what works for us. And I think that's fine, you know, whatever it is.
Is there any connection between the capability in switching? Because it's known that children with autism and being raised with a bilingual, they have an easier life in everyday coping. And can you turn around this idea so people who are capable to switch quickly in mind, they are less prone to language attrition? Something, you know?
There is quite a bit of research that links to these kinds of executive function abilities and bilingualism. So we also know, so for example, there's something called theory of mind, which children acquire around the age of 4. So if I have a child and I have 2 children and I say, here I have this marble and I'm going to put it in this bag here, and then I'm going to send one of the children out of the room and I'm going to show the other child that I'm moving the marble from the bag to, I don't know, my pocket. And then I ask the child, if I call in this other girl now and ask her to find the marble, where do you think she'll look? And until about the age of 4 or 5, the child will say, well, she'll look in your pocket because that's where it is. And this is something that sometimes in autism, people never acquire, this ability to, so then later on the child will know, okay, you know, I know this, but she doesn't because she wasn't in the room. Bilingual children acquire this earlier. And autistic children, it can help autistic children. Autistic children can also be helped, for example, if they learn sign language, where you have to watch somebody's face. That can really improve the ability to make eye contact. So there are lots of benefits to both typically developing children and children with various neurodivergence issues. And it seems that bilingualism can enhance the ability to switch very, very quickly between tasks and things like that. Whether there is a link between that ability, that some people have that ability stronger than others anyway, regardless of whether they're bilingual or not, has not, to my knowledge, been investigated and would be very difficult to investigate anyway, I think, because it is so, there's so much that you would have to factor into the research design. It's an interesting question. I doubt it. I think we've come both to the end of the time and the end of the questions.
Very well timed.
Yeah, I realised when I stopped watching looking else in the club, I realised that's completely dark.
All right, you have to. This one here is So thank you all very much for being so disciplined in terms of your time. Thank you for your interesting questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.